Today I want to talk about the history of the Disney Vacation Club, otherwise known as the DVC. What is it? Well, in short, it's Disney's own timeshare program, and its creation was just one more piece of a larger puzzle that made up the Disney decade. What we know today as timeshares began as a trend in the UK in the early 1960s called vacation home sharing. The concept was simple. 3 or 4 families who knew and trusted each other would all chip in to buy a vacation home, and then they would share the use of that home across the seasons of the year. It was a way to have your own vacation home without paying the full price for one. In 1963 in Switzerland, a company called Hapag took that concept to the next level. While it happens occasionally, most of the time a family isn't going to spend an entire season at a vacation home, so rather than let the property sit unused for most of the year, why not split up the ownership into 1-week segments rather than whole seasons? That way you could sell the use rights to upwards of 50 people instead of just 3 or 4. In 1965, the concept made its way to the US and first showed up in Maui at the Hilton Hale Ka'anapali Resort. Later, in 1969, the first non-hotel condominium timeshare was sold on the island of Kauai. So why Hawaii? Well, it was perfect. If your goal was to sell off access to the space for every week of the year, you're going to have a much easier time selling off those winter weeks when the resort is in beautiful sunny Hawaii. Over the following 2 decades, the industry would grow and grow and grow. The problem, however, is that along with it, a bad reputation for the industry would also grow and grow and grow. And to be clear, that bad reputation is entirely deserved. Trying to use free gifts like theme park tickets to lure travelers into long-winded sales pitches that lasted hours and hours, offering free alcoholic drinks at those sales pitches to try and lower people's inhibitions, high-pressure sales tactics that sometimes involve trying to guilt people into signing on, intentionally confusing and complex contracts that made it nearly impossible to back out. This is a major long-term investment, and it's the kind of decision that should be made with a clear mind and time to work out the details. All of these tactics were used to influence people to do the exact opposite. And unfortunately, it worked. By the early 1990s, despite the negative image, the timeshare industry was booming. And as it would turn out, Orlando was the most popular spot for them. In fact, that region alone accounted for an estimated $400 million that were being spent every year. Why? Well, similar to places like Hawaii, the weather was ideal for selling off weeks in the off months. There was another reason though. It was close to Disney World. Now, at this point, Disney CEO Michael Eisner had already turned the Disney company around and saved it from a takeover. It was on an upswing and was doing so well that he had declared the 90s the Disney decade. One of the many tactics Eisner employed that decade was that whenever they recognized a business opportunity that was directly or indirectly benefiting from them, they would step into that business themselves and create their own unique Disney version of it. Disney-owned hotels, the Disney store, the cruise line, they all had their ups and downs, but for the most part, they'd turn into successful business ventures. It was a growing $400 million a year industry right in their backyard, and with plenty of land to spare, there was no reason not to seek out a piece of that pie. And so in September of 1991, the Disney Vacation Club was born. Now, right from the get-go, right there with the Disney Vacation Club, they were acting on their intention to distance themselves from the negative reputation the industry had. Marc Pacala, senior VP of the DVC, said, quote, "We're a vacation club. We're calling ourselves something different. We are different. We want people to judge by our performance, not in reaction to the word timeshare. And that, quote, the underlying premise of a timeshare is sound. We've tried to approach this thing in a manner that avoids the problems of the past." Sure enough, Disney took efforts to make sure the DVC capitalized on all of the better aspects of the business model without leaning into the unethical practices that plagued it. For one, the DVC is a point-based timeshare program. That means that instead of purchasing a specific or rotating week at one specific resort, you instead invest generally into a home resort and in return get annual points that you can use to book at a number of different resorts. You can save up your points for future years or even borrow future points early. Disney wasn't the first to use such a system, but out of all of the different timeshare varieties, this was the most flexible. In terms of selling memberships to the DVC, Disney initially decided that no gifts would be offered in return for sitting through sales pitches. On top of that, the 90-minute sales pitches were also paired with 3 separate opportunities for guests to leave. In fact, salespeople were even trained to look out for guests who appeared bored or restless so that they could offer them a chance to leave with no questions asked. The process for picking salespeople who fit within Disney's culture, where guest experience came first, was extensive, and it took 1,600 applicants before the first 30 salespeople were hired. Additionally, without specifying how, Pacala said that feedback guests would give to Disney at the end of their exchange would impact the earnings for those salespeople, disincentivizing them from using uncomfortable high-pressure sales tactics. When Disney began selling memberships that September, they had set aside 51 units of their upcoming Old Key West resort for the program before expanding it to 197 units. By the end of the first year, sales of memberships totaled up to almost $50 million. By 1993, another 150 units were under construction, with another 150 planned after that. By the end of the Disney decade, they had built 2,100 units across 7 resorts that included 1 resort in Vero Beach and 1 in Hilton Head, South Carolina. In 2011, they opened their furthest standalone DVC resort, Aulani, which, as fate would have it, brought them back to where it all began in the US, Hawaii. The DVC was a successful venture that still grows to this day. And it stands as another example of the idea that when Disney approaches a concept and tackles it themselves, focusing on the guest experience that they're famous for, even something as vilified as timeshares can work.